everyone. My name is Daniela Raposo. I'm the director of the Columbia Startup Lab. We're so excited to have you here for our next CSL Talks, which is essentially the TED Talks for the entrepreneurship ecosystem at Columbia. We have so many incredible founders and entrepreneurs at the Columbia Startup Lab who are experts in everything from edtech to fintech to blockchain to everything you can imagine. So we thought, why not give them the space and the opportunity to talk about what they're expert in and talk about their experiences as entrepreneurs and give back to the Columbia community. So with that, we present to you the CSL Talk. This week, we're so excited to have with us Jean-Pierre, who is going to be doing a talk about fundraising. He has had years and years of experience and is excited to share some top advice and expertise as an alum of the Columbia Startup Lab. He was the co-founder of Wheelie. He was in the lab more years than I can count, and we're so grateful for his time. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, JP.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for having me. Those were beautiful years, I just want to say.
The best of times.
Sounds good. Good morning, everyone, or I guess good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Jean-Pierre. Today, what I'm going to be speaking about is really the experience of raising capital. Raising capital in general, but with a particular angle or focus on my experience as a Black founder and the experience of other Black founders or people in my network, based on some of the conversations that we've kind of had behind the scenes that I feel that are important to be brought to the forefront and be spoken about publicly. A couple of key things going into this presentation. For one, I'm not coming at this from a position of I know the truth, I know what is or what is not. I'm just sharing my opinion and sharing what my experience has been like, right? So take what I say with a grain of salt. It's my experience and me sharing my opinion. My only ask for today is that if you find this presentation to be helpful or valuable, I am planning on creating a newsletter. So you could just email me at jp@wheelie.us if you're interested in signing up to my newsletter. I'm going to start it this fall. It's probably going to be either once a month or once every quarter, similar to the type of updates I've been sending to our investors and advisors. And again, there'll be another slide at the end of the presentation with my email address in case you could not note it. But let's get right into it. So what we're going to be covering today, first, for those that don't know me, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on myself. Then we're going to jump right into the topic of raising capital, and then talk about something that's important to me and that I'm trying to promote right now is the importance of building sustainable and scalable businesses, because this is mostly for you all. So starting with me, so a little bit of background on myself. So my name is Jean-Pierre. I was born in Benin in West Africa. I came to New York City as a kid, grew up in New York, went to school at the Lycée Français, which is the French school on the Upper East Side. Did my freshman year of college at Wesleyan University, which is a small liberal arts school in Middletown, Connecticut. Unfortunately, I had to drop out after freshman year for financial reasons, because at the time my father had lost his job and my parents are not going to be able to afford the $40,000 plus tuition. So I came back to New York City. I couldn't transfer to another school because I still owed Wesleyan $10,000. So they were not going to release my transcript. So I started working odd jobs here and there, working as a waiter, busser, bartending, temping for companies. The mindset at the time was, let me do what I have to do to pay back this debt and then be able to pay for my undergrad studies. To give you the story in brief, I quickly realized that with those type of jobs, there was no way I was going to be able to cover the cost of living in New York, pay back my debt to Wesleyan, as well as pay for my undergrad studies. So that's when at 19, I launched my first company, which was Touche de Finesse. It was a high-end French catering service that I started with two buddies of mine from high school who had gone on to do culinary studies. Again, giving you the story in brief, but we're able to scale that business up to doing tens of thousands of dollars in revenue on a yearly basis. Did super cool events for New York fashion shows, sit-down dinners at the UN, fancy cocktail soirees for the likes of the French American Chamber of Commerce, you name it. Touche de Finesse allowed me to pay back my debt to Wesleyan. It also allowed me to pay for my undergrad studies that I finished at Baruch, so City University in Manhattan. I then went on to co-found Authorized Dealer Films, a film production company with another buddy of mine from high school. Same story there. We're able to scale that business up to doing cool works with the likes of Converse, Dr. J, the Hall of Fame basketball player, Questlove from The Roots, Usher. We did our own film festival, the ABCD Film Festival, which was in Alphabet City, New York, and was sponsored by Jameson. So Jameson gave us a lot of money and a lot of liquor, which I like to say are two key things to entertain people, to throw on this festival. And so what was cool about the festival, at least for myself, was at the time, one of the questions I had was, did I get lucky with the catering company, or is there something that I genuinely understand about the process of you have an idea, you build a team around it, and then you bring a product or service to market that other people are going to pay you for. So being able to do it with the production company was like a validation point for myself, that like, hey, I like doing this and I think I'm good at it. Fast forward, I go away to Europe and I use an early version of what is today BlaBlaCar. At the time, they were just a small French startup called covoiturage.fr, which means carpooling in French. I used it to get around Spain and France, from Barcelona, to Toulouse, to Montpellier, to Aix-en-Provence, to Marseille, to Cannes, to Nice. And I was like, wow, this is super cool. How come we don't have something like this in America? And that's the beginning of Wheelie. So I came back from that trip, took the next 2 years to sell off my client list with the catering company, transfer my responsibilities with the production company, to then focus on Wheelie full time. And so what we were doing at Wheelie is we were looking to build the biggest transportation network in America by leveraging the relation between highways and universities that are in the boonies. The thing to understand about the American landscape is that most kids in America don't go to a Columbia University or NYU or a Boston University. Most kids in America go to a Texas A&M, a UMass Amherst, University of Vermont, big state and private schools that are basically in the middle of nowhere and where there's limited transportation options. So we were leveraging that relationship to build our transportation network. We're able to scale the company to a team of about 9 individuals, raise about, forget the exact number, but somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5 million through Techstars, got some superstar investors behind us. We're able to scale to about 18 campuses in the Northeast. Fast forward to today, at the beginning of this year, we were raising our next round of capital in order to expand to the Midwest and down South. We're in due diligence with 2 firms, deep diligence going 5-6 meetings in by the end of February. And then COVID starts grabbing headlines. As we all know, that kind of killed all the investor conversations. Everybody was like, well, we're not going to deploy capital in the travel space. We want to hold on and see what happens. Our plan B was to keep scaling Wheelie more organically, if you want, just by leveraging our revenues. But that plan quickly went down the drain when universities started shutting down in March. Long story short, we had to shut down the company. So I'm still in the process of doing that. I'm at the tail end of the legal and administrative process. I've started taking on consulting projects, working with either large corporate groups or startups or small companies, as well as doing these presentations, which I believe are important. And I'm going to come back to that later. And then also just keeping an ear to the ground, thinking about what my next venture is going to be. I already have, out of the few propositions I've received. And so, yeah, so that's kind of to give you a little bit of my background, my bio, but let's jump right into the subject at hand and what I am personally more excited to discuss today. So let's jump into the topic of raising capital. So first thing, like when we're talking about raising capital, let's talk about what it looks like from the outside, right? So what I often see, and I was guilty of it too, is as soon as particularly first-time entrepreneurs or first-time founders have an idea or an MVP, they have this reflex of wanting to go out and raise capital in order to build out this product or this vision or this company. The issue with that is that once you raise capital, investors are giving you money essentially for you to deploy it, not for you to sit on it. So that means that you start incurring expenses that are greater than the revenues you're bringing in as a company. So that means that by default, you're only 6 months, 12 months, preferably 18 months away from being right back on the market, needing to raise capital. And that's why I call it the hamster wheel, because it's this never-ending exercise or trap that you get yourself into. And so why do so many of us have this reflex? Why do we think that that's the course and that's the logical sequence? I think the media has a big role to play in this, in the sense that, like, if today you look at your inboxes, whether it's the updates you're getting from Crunchbase, New York Times, The Information, Wall Street Journal, whatever you name it, the story always kind of is built around, particularly the title, right? Is always built around so-and-so or company X raises $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, $100 million plus. So-and-so is valued at $1 billion plus, right? So we get this sense from the outside that everybody's raising capital. That is kind of like the normal thing to do, and the normal process or sequence. The third thing that makes this route appealing, and this is why I have the quote here, everybody wants to be like Mike, which is from Will Smith's character in the first Bad Boys movie, where he jokes around and says that everybody wants to be like Mike. And I think that, you know, we see the Travis Kalanick's of the world. We see the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world. We see the Jeff Bezos of the world. And we want to be like them, right? But the reality and the truth is that those are exceptions, right? Those are not the norms. Those are not the rules. And I often like to compare this to sports. I grew up playing sports, basketball and soccer. If any of you grew up playing sports, you'll probably relate to this. But we all at some point had an idea or an aspiration to go pro. But from a purely statistical standpoint, right, it's only a very small fraction of people that get to play in the NFL, that get to play in the NBA, that get to play in the Premier League. So again, not trying to bash dreams or pull back on people's ambition, but just trying to put it into context, right? And so the reality is that raising capital is extremely difficult. And I really want to stress that. It is extremely hard to raise money for everybody, right, to begin with. The first thing to understand is that fundraising is a full-time job. And anyone who's worked in sales is going to relate to this very personally. Like, fundraising is similar to a sales process where you basically have to build your entire funnel. You have to spend time prospecting. You have to spend time trying to get the introductions. You have to spend time doing these 30-minute, 40-minute calls or meetings, traveling to locations, doing product demos. All of this is a lot of time that you spend, you know, most often as the CEOs. And this is all time that you're not spending building your business, getting customers. And it's an effort that is very consuming. The second part of it, and the way it also consumes you, is from an emotional and psychological standpoint. And so the example that I like to use to illustrate this is fundraising is kind of like, imagine you go on 100 dates, 90 of the individuals that you go on the first date with tell you that you're ugly. The next 5 or 7 tell you like, hey, you know, let's maybe go on a second date. And then ultimately you maybe get one person, right, that you end up in a relationship with. And so I say this why? Like, I don't care how confident you are. It is a grueling process that really tests your ambition, your sense of self-worth, your sense of like, does my venture make sense? Is there even really an opportunity here? And the reason for that is because you're constantly confronted to no on a constant basis. The third thing that's important to know about raising capital is that it is not a merit-based system. So don't assume that because you start raising money that you're going to be able to raise money. Do not assume that because you hit certain business milestones that you're going to raise money. And don't assume that because you work hard at the exercise of raising money that you're going to be able to raise money. Fundraising most often depends on other factors. And as I go into the next slide, you're going to see that I slightly contradict myself, but hey, it happens. So why do some succeed at fundraising? The first thing I want to say is that FOMO is real, right? The fear of missing out. And when I think of this, I think of an interview I watched years ago with Charlie Rose and Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett said something that stuck with me to this day, where he basically says that, like, as human beings, even through the centuries, we get smarter, put out better technology, but there's certain character traits that just don't change. And in that case, he was particularly focused on talking about fear and greed. And I think this is the same thing here, right? Like, investors will invest in your company if they fear that they're not going to be able to or have the opportunity to invest in the current round or the subsequent round. And so founders that are really good at raising money are really good at creating that sense of urgency of like, hey, if you do not invest today, you're going to miss out on this opportunity in this deal. But here's the thing. Don't get it twisted. Investors also know that founders and entrepreneurs are doing this. So the best way to create urgency is by really having urgency, because you look silly, and I've been there, when you're like, hey, this deal is closing soon. You got to invest today. And then a few weeks later, or a month later, you're like, oh, hey, just checking in. I'm still looking for that whatever sum of money, which basically impacts your credibility. And now you're kind of like, achieving the opposite of what you were seeking to do, where the investors get the sense of like, there's no rush. One of the second things to keep in mind as to why some companies or some founders are able to raise money is herd mentality. We're human beings. People follow. People look for industry signals, social signals, market signals that, for them reinforce the need to invest in the space. And, if you follow kind of like the narratives that are in this tech startup world, you've seen it, right? There was a time when machine learning, or AI, as it's said in the consumer-facing space, was the hot thing, right? So a lot of companies in the space were raising money. Just right now with this pandemic, all these services that have to do with video conferencing or facilitating work at home are raising a lot of capital, right? So people do follow these trends, and they do follow what other investors are doing. The third thing that's super important to know about raising capital and why some succeed is social validation. And here I want to particularly focus on trust. One of the key reasons why someone will give you a check or has given you a check is not necessarily about your business, but it's because they trust you. And what I encourage everybody to do is to put yourself in that position, because we do this ourselves. Think about, a group of people in your network, and think about them coming to you and asking you to lend them, $5, $100, $1,000, $100K, whatever the amount. We quickly do the quick math and assessment of like, do I think that this person so-and-so is going to be able to pay me back? And so it's the same thing. It's the same thing that's at play here, right? Except the question is, do I believe this person is going to be able to return my investment? But it's fundamentally about trust. And so when we went through Techstars, we spent an entire session diving into how do you build trust, right? There are different ways to build trust that most often have nothing to do with your business milestones or KPI. And so the last super important thing to keep in mind that's going to help you or has helped others succeed in fundraising, and this is where I contradict myself when I said that it's not a merit-based system, is having extraordinary KPIs. And I really want to stress the extra part of ordinary, right? We're not talking about good KPIs. We're not talking about great KPIs. We're talking about extraordinary KPIs, where you're basically seeing over a period of time phenomenal growth with respect to whatever the key indicators for your business is, where investors will rush to invest and kind of be like, we will figure out the diligence later, we will figure out the details later, which is also, right, because they're scared of missing out, because they're scared that the next person who's going to see these metrics of this deal might just eat up the entire round and leave them no space to participate. And so with everything I've shared with you, the ugly reality is that fundraising is even harder if you're a Black founder or if you're a woman founder. And so the numbers are out there. these numbers that I pulled are from a Crunchbase article from February 2019. And as you could see, right, less than 9% of VC dollars go to female founders. Less than 1% goes to Black founders. So something to know, and again, you don't have to take my word for it. You could go out and look this up on your own. The numbers are out there. But something to know about, the VC side of the game, as well as the founders that get funding. I believe in this same article in Crunchbase, they highlight how more than 90% of VC partners in the US are white men that went to Stanford and Harvard, right? Crazy, right? More than 90%. More than 70% of founders that raise VC dollars have a white male that went to Stanford and Harvard. Again, right? Going back to fundraising is not always a function of business metrics or KPIs, but a function of how you build that trust, and educational networks are part or is a variable in that effort. And so what makes it, what are some of the things that also make it harder for Black founders and women founders or minority founders? So in my opinion, and based on my experience, I perceive that there's material barriers, cultural barriers, as well as structural barriers. And so let me touch on a couple of these points to illustrate what I mean. First, access to friends and family capital. It was the case for me. It might be for some of you that are currently watching this presentation that I did not have siblings, uncles, or even the friends I had and in their professional networks, people that were in a position to give me $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 to go out and start building Wheelie. And so what is often overshadowed or not focused on when you hear the stories of the Jeff Bezos and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world is that a lot of these individuals had access to that early friends and family capital, which is pivotal, right? In order for you to get to that MVP, in order for you to start getting some traction, to start hitting some of these business milestones so that you could start and go shop this deal out to professional angels or VCs. And so I'm at times a little offended when, well, not a little, I'm offended. When VC groups out there are talking about, hey, we want to make sure that more, diverse pool of founders get access to funding, particularly, Black, Latino, and other minority folks. And then they'll be like, we're focused on investing at a Series A stage. But I'm like, no, like if you really want to tackle the problem, the challenge for a lot of these individuals, including myself, was not, if you get to that place where you raise a seed or a Series A, like you've kind of made it into the club. You're kind of the exception. The challenge is way earlier, right? In getting that access to that original pool of capital. The other challenge is building trust. Like I said, that is the fundamental reason why someone is going to cut you a check in order for you to go build out your vision. And so some individuals build that trust leveraging their family networks, their professional networks, their educational networks, their friend networks. But if you're not from, the inner circle, as I call it, it is extremely hard to build that trust. So, if you're a kid from Brownsville, New York, for those of you that are not familiar, one of the tougher neighborhoods in this city, you could be the brightest kid in your class. You can have a venture idea, but how are you going to tap into the networks? How are you like they say, going to shake the hands and meet the people that could introduce you, right? Because that's something else that VCs famously say is that they don't want to meet you. They want to be introduced to you, because for them, it's another way to check off that social validation box. So that's extremely hard. But even if we don't go to that extreme, right? Even if you look more from the, like an individual like myself that, was fortunate enough to kind of have a foot in the door through my personal networks, building trust is not just about going to these startup events, shaking a dude's hand and then being like, yeah, I'm going to follow up with you. You don't build trust just off that one meeting. So again, I think that sometimes it's overlooked and not properly weighed or appreciated, the challenges that some individuals have in penetrating are getting access to these networks. The next thing I want to talk about is what I call the tech money culture. So, if any of you are first generation, if your parents were immigrants, which is the case for me, or even myself, I'm an immigrant, you'll relate to this, right? From the sense that like, you probably grew up in homes where there was a culture at home, but then you realize that when you went to school or in your professional space, it's a whole different set of values, right? And you kind of recognize this from a young age, like, hey, there's certain things you do at home and there's certain things that you do over there. And it's the same thing here. The tech space has a culture. So if you're unfamiliar with this culture, you might say or do things that get interpreted and recorded as negative signals to other people in the community, and particularly angel investors or venture capitalists. And to give you two examples to illustrate this, we had a meeting with one of the top VC firms. I'm not going to say the name, but you can imagine one of the more famous ones, with my co-founders and I. And so Steve, who's also Black, from Paris, from very humble beginnings, I forget how we got to the topic, but the investor asked the question, like, what do you guys perceive as success for Wheatley? And Steve said, if we're able to sell this company for 100 million or multiples of hundreds of million, that'd be dope. That'd be great. When my co-founders left the room and I was in the room with the investor, that individual was like, don't ever let him say that to an investor. And the point that we're trying to make is that nobody's going to invest in you if what you perceive to be success is a $100 million exit. And so I get it, right? I get the culture, but here's what pissed me off about that. It's completely subjective, for one, right? This whole chasing unicorns. For most people in this world, for me, like, making $1 million is a lot of money. Making $10 million is a lot of money, let alone making $100 million as an exit is a lot of money. So what pissed me off is that how this person interpreted this number to then assume that we lack the ambition, we lack the vision, or we lack the drive of creating a sizable business simply because the number that was referenced is a number that in this person's perception is a low outcome. Another example of this is, as we were in between rounds and I was talking with an investor of ours at the time, and I was debating whether I try to go, again, spend time raising a big round, or if I just bring in a little bit more capital in order to reach the next business milestones. This individual was like, don't go raise a round, just bring in an additional 50K. It's going to be super easy. You're going to get it done. It's a better use of your time. What I was thinking in the back of my head, and again, I don't think this person had any ill intentions or was trying to be disrespectful, but they were essentially projecting, right? They basically assumed that because for them getting access to $50,000 is an easy task, they assume that it must be the case for me. But again, like, if you don't come from these circles where you have people in your network that could afford to lose that 10K, that 20K, that 25K, then, raising 10,000 or 50,000 is no easy task, right? And sometimes it's just the same amount of work as going and trying to raise $1 million round. Which brings me to my last point about unconscious bias. And just to be clear here, like, I'm not trying to represent the message that VCs are bad. That's not the point I'm trying to make. And I'm not saying, and at least I don't believe that people discriminate intentionally. But I do think there's a lot of bias at play. And an example or a way that I like to illustrate this is by using gambling and casinos. So if I go to Vegas every weekend and I make my money off blackjack, there's a very low likelihood that the next time I go back to gamble that I'm going to play poker, because it's just not how I've made money in the past. It's not how I've seen other people make money in the past. And so investors, going back to my previous point, they follow trends, right? So, and again, I'm not saying that people are necessarily doing this consciously, but if I'm used to investing in the Mark Zuckerberg profile, what is the likelihood that someone that presents themselves in front of me and pitches a company, what's the likelihood that I'm going to invest in them if they don't fit the professional background, the educational background, the ethnic background, or whatever other subconscious criterias I use in making my investor decision. Because let's be real, anything that's up to a seed round and even sometimes Series A, it's a subjective decision. It's not an objective decision. It's not as if you check off so-and-so box, you get the money. It's not like taking an exam. And so with all of that, I'm one to not just present problems, but also think about solutions and ways that we could move forward in order for us as entrepreneurs to make sure that we are successful. So first important thing is, building sustainable and scalable businesses. And so what I mean by sustainable is, instead of having that reflex of as soon as you have an idea, as soon as you have an MVP of wanting to go out and seek capital, I would challenge all of us to actually think about, how do I bring in enough revenue through paying customers to support that initial team, right? That initial team of 2 or 3 individuals, right? And the reason that's important is that, again, particularly if you fit in one of those minority groups, your chances of raising capital are slim to inexistent, right? So if you're able to at least build a sustainable business where you're bringing in enough revenue to sustain the company, even if you go out and you try to raise capital, even if you fail, not being able to raise capital does not mean the end of your business and your company. And I think that's important, because I don't think that VCs should be the one deciding which companies live and die, as if we live back in the times of the Roman Forum with the gladiators. And so the reason why that's also important, I believe, is that we need to change the power dynamic around fundraising. So today, VCs have the luxury to open their inboxes and get 100 plus emails with pitches, with decks, right? We're the ones constantly knocking on their door, seeking to raise capital. I think that we should flip this around, and by building sustainable businesses, this is how we do it. I think that they should be the ones knocking on our door to get that opportunity, to get that chance to put in their capital. And the best way to do this is by not needing their capital, and is by building structures where you could walk away from a bad term sheet. Because that's the other part of it, right? A lot of founders that raise capital, they don't tell you the truth of whether or not they got screwed on the term sheet, whether or not they still control their company. You have all these things that are happening behind the scenes that, founders talk about in private, but I feel like need to be spoken about in public. And the other part that's important in, changing this power dynamic is, I think it's about regaining our independence as entrepreneurs. So for me personally, I started building businesses because it was a necessity. I needed to pay for school. But in the process of doing that, I went out and did things because, I first tried to look for these glamorous jobs without a college degree, and I realized nobody was going to hire me. But then I was like, let me go and create, if nobody thinks I'm smart enough because I don't have a degree to fulfill this role, let me go and create the role that I think I'm qualified to do. And in that process, I went and started businesses. And in that process, I didn't ask anybody for permission. I got up and went out to build what I had envisioned. And so something that's frustrated me over the years of fundraising, and I've had a lot of time to reflect on this during the stay-at-home period and really understand what was so frustrating for me about the fundraising exercise. What pissed me off is that the fundraising is kind of like asking for permission, right? Because when you're going out and looking to raise capital from these individuals, you're essentially trying to pitch them and convince them that what you're working on is important, that it's valuable, and that there's an opportunity for it. And again, I don't think VCs should be making the choice or deciding which companies live or die. I think that our customers should. And I've seen too often Techstars companies, Y Combinator companies, just great companies all around, even the ones that didn't go through accelerators or incubators, where founders will shut down their companies, not because they don't have a growing business, not because they don't have a smart idea, not because they don't have the right team, but because they're not able to raise that next round of capital. And they're not able to sustain their enterprise. And so an additional reason why this is important for me is that, and because of the pain, right? And again, I'm pro-entrepreneur. I speak for entrepreneurs. That's who I stick my neck out for. And this is who this presentation is for. And I've seen too often entrepreneurs that are not able to raise the next round of capital put it on themselves, think that they did something wrong, or that the business that they were building, there wasn't a market opportunity for it. And I think that in America, sadly, there's this false notion that you succeed on your own and that you fail because you did something wrong. And that's not true, right? When you read about, you see these success stories, there's so many social mechanics at play behind the scenes that help certain individuals get access to capital, that help certain individuals get access to clients, that help certain individuals, recruit the team in order to scale and build. So your inability to get to that next milestone is not a testament to your potential as an individual, or your leadership skills, or your creativity. And I think it's important for us as entrepreneurs, right? Like, we're the ones that are spending 14-hour days. We're the ones having sleepless nights. We're the ones like going through crazy amount of stress, to build these companies, to bring these visions to life. We also need to change the way we build venture-backed companies in order for us to see the change that we aspire for. And I started doing these presentations prior to the murder of George Floyd, but obviously with that occurrence, this has taken an even, this topic has taken an even, or has been pushed to the forefront of everybody's interest. And you're seeing all these articles about, you need more diverse partners in the VC groups. You need a more diverse, portfolio with respect to who you invest in. You need a more diverse LP pool. And I'm not that old, but I've been around long enough to come to the conclusion, come to the opinion that VCs are in the business of making money. They're not in the business of social justice. And so I think it's pointless to request this change. I think that if we want to see change when it comes to diversity, respect to the companies that get access to capital, with respect to the partners that are able to raise their own funds and become VC partners, when it comes to the LPs that are able to participate, I think that we as entrepreneurs have the power and the capacity to make that change happen. And again, it goes back to how we build these businesses, because, and I've seen founders do this. When you're in a position now where different investors are knocking on your door to invest in your company and your startups, and again, I'm not speaking theoretically, I've seen this at play, the power dynamic has changed. You now get to do the due diligence. You now get to ask the questions as to, how many female partners do you have at your firm? What does your LP pool look like? What does your portfolio of companies that you invested in look like, right? And now you get to choose whose check you want to take based on the values that are important to you. And believe me, once VCs start losing out on money and start losing out on deals because they're not, from their structure or from the decision-making, they're not reflecting what's valuable and what's important to us as founders, then you're going to start to see accelerated change, right? Because now it's part of their incentive mechanism towards that goal of returning capital to their investors. So again, all this to say that, like, I think that entrepreneurs are a very unique group of individuals. And I think that we have the capacity, the power, and the tools to create the world that we want to see. We already do it when we get out of bed and we decide to take a big risk and go launch a company. In that same vein, we have the capacity to also change the profile and what this industry looks like from the inside. And so that's it for what I wanted to share with you all. Again, like I said, if you found this to be valuable or interesting, only ask is to shoot me an email and just say that you're interested in signing up for the newsletter that I'm going to start. And so with that said, Daniela, I think I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thank you so much, JP. That was absolutely amazing. I know I learned so much. And with that, I think that about wraps it up for our CSL Talks. Thank you, JP, for coming back to the lab and offering us your time. And thank you all for tuning in. I hope you tune in again and for our next CSL Talks, which will be hosted by a current CSL member who is also a Columbia College alum and a current teacher college student, Zach Ringelston. He will talk about the world of EdTech the future of learning and tell you a little bit more about his startup, Zigazoo. So hope to catch you then, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.